Good morning and welcome to this session of Business Breathers, a live webinar series hosted by Goodman Group at Brock University. My name is Abdul Rahimi and it's my distinct pleasure to serve as the Director of Goodman Group here at Brock University. Goodman Group is a community-focused learning and services development provider that works to support professionals pursuing growth and businesses pursuing the next line in their product line, and of course those who are interested in startup. That's all the lines of support that we provide through Goodman Group's professional development, consulting services, and venture development services in all of those three areas. It is my pleasure to welcome the many of you who have taken time to join us and take part in today's webinar and session. For those of you who've been following us for a while, you know that these sessions are 45 minutes in length, and they're on Wednesdays from 11 to 11:45, and they are filled with many insightful discussions and topics from the award-winning faculty member right here from within the university, and of course, leading industry experts coming from outside in the community as well. And today's format, like the previous ones, will include a 30-minute discussion, approximately 30-minute discussion on the topic of cybersecurity, and that is led by Dr. Mauro, who is an associate professor, an assistant professor at Brock University, and that will be the 30 minutes will be followed by a 15-minute approximately of Q&A. So please put your questions in the chat feature, which is open now. You may also tweet your questions and comments using @GSB Goodman Group. That is @GSB Goodman Group, all one word. And we have also had a number of you who have posed your question at the time of registration. So thank you very much for all of you who've done that. Now, it is my distinct pleasure to take a moment to introduce to you today's presenter, and that's Dr. Mauro, who is the Assistant Professor of Digital Media at Brock University in the Center for Digital Humanities. He teaches on topics relating to digital culture, natural language processing, and app development. He has had a number of publications in numerous journals, and he's working on a book, which is called, I'm just going to look at my note, it's Human Exploits, Cyberpunk, and Digital Humanities, Cybersecurity for Humanities. And it's the publication with Bloomsbury Publishing. Aaron, thank you very much for taking the time to be here. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Abdul. This is really exciting for me, and I want to thank everybody for attending the session, as well as watching at home. And I'm really just excited to talk about security practices and some of the security practices and the issues that arise from working at home. This is part of the new normal. And I'd like to really just talk about a range of issues today associated with that, including really just everyday security practices for individuals, employees, as we work from home and adjust to these new habits that we have, as well as larger institutional questions relating to the future of digital infrastructure and the kinds of things that we want to build. And so as we go on to this agenda here, I'm really just organizing my remarks through these questions. I'm animated by a series of questions, and I'd like to start by sketching the current security landscape as it relates to, and some of the things that have been exposed from the COVID-19 situation. And one of the largest issues relating to the security in COVID-19 is moving large portions of our workforce online. So we'll spend more time with that. And I'd like to describe very practical steps that individual employees can take all the way from the C-suite on down. This really is, as I'll say today, a team effort. It's something that is bringing everyone on board to take care of these things. And then I'd like to really reflect on how COVID-19 represents an opportunity to build back better, as some individuals have been saying, and security-minded infrastructure and culture, and some of those things that we can continue to do. So if we look to the next slide, we'll see the remote desktop protocol is something that may be familiar to you. And it was something that was brought up because really we are in unprecedented times from a security perspective as well as many others. But sometimes these old attacks kind of come back into fashion. And RDP hacks, ransomware, and phishing campaigns have been really some of the most common attacks during the COVID-19 crisis, and they have been ballooning. If this user interface is part of your workflow, I want to be here to ask you to reevaluate some of your decisions around infrastructure and the needs of your employees. In a recent report from Atlas VPN that was published in May of 2019, just as the COVID-19 crisis was spiking, they noticed that within that month, there was just under 1.5 million RPD attacks recorded within their own surveil. And so these are very large numbers of attacks that are occurring because of the need to rapidly deploy new infrastructure for employees as they move to home. And RDP was something that was just available for many IT departments to deploy quickly. And so across this entire period, when we average it from really until present, we're looking at an increase of RPD attacks in the order of 330% increases from previous years. And so this is a remarkable thing. And the reason that RDP is desirable is that there's a large range of potential vulnerabilities with this protocol, and the ease of deploying an exploit on this system is really attractive to attackers. And so this is a kind of almost a professionalism question, I would say, that RDP, and I would joke that it's equivalent to kind of wearing flip-flops to the office. There are likely workplaces that you can pull it off, but generally speaking, it shouldn't really be done. And so these are things, if we go on to the next slide, we'll see that that many individuals have been monitoring this particular risk for workplaces. Shodan, which is a search engine for exploring internet-connected computers online, Shodan published a report early on in the pandemic showing the rise in RDP attacks from March to April, and these spikes in exposure, I think, map very closely to some of the fallout in deploying ransomware and other malware that we've seen kind of globally. And so that last tail there would be seeing a long decline in the use of RPD, and then a sharp uptick, and that uptick was an opportunity for attackers. Now, RDP also should not be exposed to the open internet like this, that Shodan shouldn't really be able to see these things, and yet they are. Shodan also was able to understand that many of these RDP connections that were exposed to the open internet were also not even under a password, that they were unprotected. And so this demonstrates a significant security risk because the consequences of deploying RDP badly is so high. A misconfigured RPD connection can allow attacker to gain a foothold in your network, move laterally between different systems, and we can imagine a scenario where an executive assistant perhaps working from home becomes compromised because of that elevated position. An attacker would be able to use those credentials to maybe move to an executive or even a systems admin, and access vulnerable systems in that way. And so again, this is maybe one of my warnings for today, but it's also a reason to think about why attackers are accessing systems in this way. And if we see the next slide, ransomware is really one of the largest trends that we've seen alongside things like phishing and RPD attacks. That ransomware is probably the biggest single security threat that we face in 2020. They're absolutely crippling, they're costly, and they're difficult to recover from. And so for many, we might all know or have seen a headline like this from 2017 when the famous ransomware WannaCry was released on Britain's National Health Service. And this was a very damaging attack at the time. It stopped hospitals and GPs from accessing patient data after the computers were compromised. And it was a compromise that stopped computers for a relatively small amount, just 230 pounds were asked per computer. Now, the effects of this were very grave. Without access to patient records, doctors couldn't prescribe drugs. They were unable to anticipate certain side effects. Hospitals could not schedule treatments or schedule diagnostic tests. And so this was a crippling attack. And WannaCry is notable because the attack was used against Windows machines, but it was made possible by another series of attacks by an organization known as shadow brokers. That shadow brokers very famously broke into NSA systems and leaked a lot of the tooling and exploits that the NSA in the United States had reserved for their own national security purposes. And these exploits, sometimes called zero days, are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars on the black market, sometimes more. And national governments have a habit of reserving these exploits for their own uses. And so they won't necessarily report them back to, say, in this case, Microsoft, but instead they'll keep a 0 day for later use. The one that was used in WannaCry was called Eternal Blue and has led to a lot of other malicious software that's been developed. And on the next slide, you'll see how the WannaCry message appeared. And if we see something like this in an institution, this is a very bad day. WannaCry was certainly not the first ransomware deployed, but it paved the way, I think, for the trends that we're seeing today. And so we hear names like Petya, NotPetya, CryptoLocker, Doppelpaymer, Ryuk are all famous names in cybersecurity circles, and really are causing havoc in a lot of areas. Ransomware crews are incredibly professionalized. You can see the interface here looks like a regular application. It even has a contact us button. They have documentation and customer support to help the uninitiated deal with the vagaries of cryptocurrencies, and even just helping them to restore their systems. And so it becomes almost a transactional experience for many. And organizations, I think, have a burden to admit to being compromised. I think that there's a cloak of secrecy and maybe guilt and shame around these things. And so I want to maybe encourage that if an institution is compromised, that it's important that the technical documentation to the attack is made public, so that others can mitigate against those risks. And there's really a growing trend to really broaden these things. These are not maybe exclusive to large corporations, but we've seen a trend towards municipal governments with aging infrastructure, maybe under-resourced IT departments. And these municipal governments are able to pay. They're very well insured, and so they're ideal targets for international actors who are looking for a payday. Now, they also have lots of citizen-focused or public-facing platforms that would, for making tax payments or paying for a building permit. And just recently, just last month, St. John, New Brunswick in Canada was a victim of a similar kind of ransomware attack. But other cities across the United States, including Pensacola, Florida, New Orleans, Baltimore, Atlanta, the list goes on. Many cities have been affected in this way, as well as many organizations, including corporations and public entities. Now, on the next slide, we'll see something even more recent. Just within the month, IBM published an excellent report from their IBM threat research team called X-Force that really showed how really no one is immune to these kinds of attacks, and that the attacks can sometimes be unsophisticated or very kind of untechnical. That a phishing attack can have very dramatic impacts on a company like having to do with cold storage, logistics, and manufacturing for the new COVID-19 vaccines. And so this report from IBM, which was just released recently, showed that it was a coordinated attack. It was international in scope across Germany, Italy, Korea, the Czech Republic, as well as Taiwan. And it was this directed spear phishing attack. And so these were highly targeted at individuals who were at the executive level in sales and procurement, information technology, and finance, to gain a foothold in the networks related to the companies that would be developing and delivering the logistic support for the COVID-19 vaccine. And so the opportunity was made available by attackers, but it is also a good reminder to know that no one is immune, that these were individuals who are senior level, they were experienced employees, and they were still falling victim to these kinds of phishing attempts. And so we have a lot of risks from working at home on our next slide that I want to kind of break down and discuss, that all organizations are at a disadvantage in this paradigm. I think that the assumption that any of us are prepared adequately is maybe a difficult one to admit that maybe it is not the case. That the attack surfaces of organizations, whether they're private or public, is very large. It's multiplied by the number of people and the number of devices and the kind of software you're using. And defense and security is inherently asymmetrical. Defending institution needs to be successful 100% of the time, whereas an attacker needs to be successful just once. And so that asymmetry really causes a lot of difficulty for IT departments tasked with this kind of defense. And so it really is a team sport. It's something that everyone needs to be included in, particularly as we move to working at home. Now, in the next slide, you can see that there's a kind of a scenario from working at home where we might be thinking about kind of allocating the edge of the network, where it is that we access our resources. And so working from home reorders the typical enterprise experience, because we no longer go to work. We no longer turn on a managed computer that's issued by IT, and we no longer log into an enterprise grade network. When we work at home, the edge of the network is redistributed to all our houses. Access points and devices expand the potential attack surface of these hostile actors. After all, when we work at home, our work infrastructure is just another cloud service among many. You may be logged into Apple or Google, as well as your work infrastructure. And so there's a range of network access points that you may be using as well, from cell towers to your own Wi-Fi or an Ethernet. And these security threats are multiplied by the number of devices that you use in your day-to-day work, whether it's a phone, a tablet, or a laptop. And so the edge of the network has really expanded quite dramatically. And if we look at the next slide, we can see a scenario where this new kind of dynamic of working at home off of managed IT infrastructure means that attackers have a lot of opportunities. And a really motivated attacker, maybe in a local area, could maybe use social media to identify a key individual, someone who is particularly important to an organization, and maybe find where they live through images, and find an access to a router. Maybe be able to infiltrate a poorly configured router, snoop in, their network traffic, maybe even access their browser and inject authentication pages and scraping passwords in that way. And so all of these kinds of opportunities are available, but it's also international in scope. If we look at the next slide, where another scenario might see someone from anywhere in the world attempt to access other cloud services that are not directly related to work, and use that as a pivot into your institutional resources. So an employee could regard, their Google email as maybe less serious, less important, and maybe not take the correct security precautions. And so by accessing a less trusted account, maybe that attacker could use it for false password resets, or use it as a foothold into their online life, to then pivot into more valuable access like an institutional resource. And so any scenario where, in any of these scenarios, ransomware means that the realities of ransomware means that a simple phishing campaign that's broadly distributed, maybe automatic, could be automated, could be highly targeted, means that it could really to completely derail an institution and seriously damage the brand or even its core mission. If we think about past corporate attacks like the famous attacks against Target or Home Depot, or even recently against Garmin, those attacks really damaged the brand in ways that takes years to recover from, well after the hardware, the technical support has been recovered. And so on the next slide, I'd like to look at some of these different scenarios in the way that our devices and our networks and our communications work. And so if you are bringing your own device, it's important that you play the role as a support person to your IT department. So update your operating systems regularly. Use a strong passphrase. And so, think about using multiple words like correct horse battery staple from the famous Randall Munroe XKCD comic. Use second factor authentication with Google Authenticator or Duo. Use a mainstream browser like Chrome or Firefox or Safari. These are incredibly secure systems now, and browsers are some of our more secure applications if they're regularly updated. Avoid browser plugins, that these are not as well authenticated maybe or viewed as something you'd find on an iOS store. So browser plugins are very risky things to have installed, and they tend to allow people to maybe take over a well-intentioned app over time. Avoid Electron-based apps like those used for Discord or Slack. Those are kind of a weaker browser, not as well configured as something like Chrome or Safari. And maybe avoid using your mobile device for simple tasks. If you're very quickly responding to messages, that kind of speed, as I'll mention in a second, is also part of the problem in this environment. Really have us in our next slide, we can look at our network access. Buy a new Wi-Fi router. If you're at home and your Wi-Fi router has not been updated in a while, now's the time. Wi-Fi 6 is available. It's a good time to do it. If you're happy with your router, update the firmware. Again, use strong passphrases and try not to use the same passphrases across all of your systems, and even use a passphrase manager as a way of kind of allowing you to have multiple passphrases and spare your memory. And avoid naming your router in an identifying way. It's a remarkable thing. You might put your family name in it, and this would be an easy way to identify anyone interested in maybe snooping on your traffic. Configure your router properly. This can be a technical problem, but avoid anything that's set up with WEP. That's the oldest standard and easily hacked from simple radio waves. We can snoop on that traffic easily. Disable WPS, which is a customer-focused system that is easily brute force because it's based on a simple integer-based keyword to set up your Wi-Fi router. And use WEPA2 whenever possible. This is really the gold standard. And if your router allows it, you may also want to add on advanced encryption standard. You can usually run those two together, and you'd be running military-grade encryption over your Wi-Fi at home. So these are things that you can do. And there are many tutorials to get that kind of thing done, or work with your IT department to do that. On the next slide, we get into some of the more human issues, right? So some of the things I've mentioned are technical in nature, but security is also a human problem. Some of our habits, our biases become points of vulnerability for an attacker. And so when we think about working at home, it's important to separate our personal and professional communication, whether that's just logging out of your personal accounts and logging into your work accounts when you show up to work in the day, or having a separate device that does the work for your workplace, and another device for your home. And I think it's important to kind of regularize your communication practices with your coworkers, that use a single platform to communicate, whether it's email or something like Slack or Basecamp, that if you have a regular channel of communication, then it's more difficult for a phishing attempt to kind of slide in unexpectedly. And it really is about mitigating some of these unexpected interactions. And so having your images load by default is probably a bad idea. You probably, even though having nice Lux HTML in your email is nice to look at, There can be malware or tracking pixels embedded in images in the emails that you load regularly. And so these are little things that give attackers extra information. And so by disabling that by default is a good idea. Do not open unexpected files. If you receive a file from a coworker, make sure that it is something that you expect and it's done through the appropriate channels. If it's not something that you expect, maybe seek confirmation from the sender before opening it. And if that can't be done and it's appropriate to upload to a third party, there's a great service called Virus Total that will work as almost like a controlled detonation for a potential piece of malware. You can upload it to VirusTotal, and they will be able to determine if it has malicious intent. And so this is a great tool for many of us. It's managed by Alphabet, the Google parent company. And so that's something to kind of put in your back pocket. Also, be careful when you're hovering over or when you're working with links that hover over them. Most browsers will have an ability to show you the link. And so if it's the correct destination, then make sure before you click. And so this is all about slowing down. It's about changing the pace of our work environment so that we can, really make good choices, because it really is about making sure that the correct mitigation practices can be taken into place. That a typical ransomware attack is now measured in from the moment of exposure to the moment of it being exploited and used on your system is measured now in hours rather than days or weeks as it once was in the past. So these processes are speeding up. And so if we slow down, we can make better choices. And whenever you are in doubt, always ask, whether it's a coworker, your supervisor, or even going to IT. Those are really important. Now, this is kind of reflecting on some of these things about our post kind of COVID-19 security landscape. But it's important that I think to accept that working remotely is at least in part our new normal, and that the edge of the network and all of the devices and software will mean that proper security protocols will be very varied and unpredictable. And that the threat actors that we see, particularly in the malware space, are highly technical, they're international, and they're highly motivated because the payoff is so great. Ransomware attacks are going to be really the norm and continue to grow in the coming years, because they can absolutely cripple corporations, public institutions, and governments, and they are so profitable for those who are engaging in these kinds of things. And we've seen in recent reports that the security insurance that have been a bit of a bubble, I would say, since 2008 onwards, that those insurance costs are increasing dramatically and may be out of reach for a lot of institutions and organizations when it comes to, in particular, ransomware. And so in the last slide, I just want to really look ahead to the kinds of infrastructure that we want to build. That it's a part of this phrase around building back better in the kinds of vulnerabilities that COVID-19 has exposed to a lot of us. And that building resilient digital infrastructure in both our private and public institutions, including municipalities, as I've mentioned, we'll want to think about normalizing good security practices and good security culture. And part of that would be thinking about and normalizing some of the phrasing around this zero trust architecture, which is, as I say, a new and evolving standard that should be something that we are working to advocate for and deploying in our institutions, but also educating users in how to understand where their data is and how to best authenticate and allow for these systems to work. Now, if we invest in training our employees, this is a great time to do it. And if you're hearing the phrase zero trust for the first time today, that's great. But it really has been a buzzword in the cybersecurity world for a number of years, and there are a lot of vendors who are claiming to offer this service to get there. Some of them better than others. And I think that that's the case because really these are newly developed and released. They've been in development for many years, but the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre published their documentation for Zero Trust just in January of 2020. The US National Institute of Standards and Technology, under the US Department of Commerce, published their Zero Trust architecture documentation in just August of 2020. So these are new standards. They're evolving and changing. But really, to put a simple definition to this phrase that I've been using for a while now, is to say that zero trust is simply a network architecture that allows for siloed online services. It requires strong authentication measures to access individual services across your institution. So if your institution has, let's say, your email, your bulk file storage, and maybe something like a service like Workday, those would require individual authentication, sometimes supported by biometrics like Face ID or fingerprints, or if you have a YubiKey, is a brand name biometric system that is quite good as well. And these kinds of services, these kinds of approaches are really important because we're moving away fundamentally from a walled garden approach where firewalls are doing the protection for us. And instead, we're thinking about how strong user authentication will allow for these systems to better understand who's accessing. What's the health of their device? Have they updated their browser recently? Have they used the correct applications in accessing the networks? And are they fulfilling the control policies in place? And if not, then perhaps authentication can be denied to that individual employee. And so managing access rights, as well as really building kind of a culture where individuals at the edge of the network are involved in ensuring the security of our systems. And so I want to leave it there, and I really I welcome your questions.
Aaron, thank you for that very much. As you would expect, a reasonable amount of interest in this area. So I'm going to put some of the questions to you as they have come through. How can you tell if an email warning is legitimate when it indicates your inbox is full or messages haven't been received or sent? They appear to be from a company administrator.
Well, this is, again, these are part of our habits. This is a great question, and I think it's this going slow is really important. Speed kills, and so if you're opening an email, it's a lot of our interfaces will hide the sender or will simply show a name rather than the email itself, and so it's important that if there's a suspicious email, click on the sender to expose the email that's being sent. And if you get something that's unexpected, maybe contact the person who claims to have sent it to you. And if they're asking you to click on a link to a service that you know that you use regularly, maybe navigate to that service in your regular channels. So rather than using the link provided in an email, which may be malicious, use your regular channels and log in and see if that notification or that warning is actually present on the service as you know. And so this is, again, it's about slowing down and having a healthy sense of skepticism with any resource that's sent to you.
Great advice. Thank you, Aaron. This next one is perhaps a little bit closer to home when in the topic of multifactor authentication, or MFA. Is there an alternative security solution versus automatically logging out users after approximately 10 minutes of an activity? When using a number of software and then you get logged out and have to then use MFA, can interfere with productivity.
It absolutely can, and I think that these are some of the sacrifices that we want to make. I think that the sacrifice to productivity is probably a warranted one, given that the risk of failure, as we mentioned, you'd have to be wrong just once to cripple an institution. That I think that these are some of the norms of kind of professional work practices that we would expect in a workplace, and online. This is what a professional kind of employee coming to work ready to do the job would do. But there are great tools that can kind of simplify these things. I really recommend looking at the YubiKey, which is a hardware device that will grant access. Of course, Duo, Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator are great, and they're right on your phone. So they're designed to be as quick and easy as possible, but there really is no better way to guard your online accounts than using second factor or multi-factor authentication. So I wish I could say I can make it easier, but these are the sacrifices we make.
I guess it's the cost of doing work and using networks, to put another way. Understood, absolutely. What type of antivirus software would you recommend? Are the free antivirus software reliable enough to protect us, or should we invest in a software for ongoing protection?
You know, I'm highly suspicious of most malware detection software. Quite often, they cause more problems, more kind of anxiety in the user than maybe is warranted. That Microsoft really has become very, in particular, because they're the largest operating system that is under attack most often. But Microsoft has become very responsive to a lot of the threats that they see. And so this is why I really recommend updating your operating system. And I know that that can feel like a impact on productivity as well when you get that blue screen and it's stopping you from doing your work. But updating your operating system is really one of the key ways to defend against that. What you'll get with something like a virus scanning or anti-malware software is maybe a day or two, maybe a week lead time where you might get a warning on a malicious package. But if you're following some of these kind of human-centered processes that will mitigate some of those risks, I think that you can really start to trust Microsoft, and really Windows 10 itself is a much better operating system than we've seen in recent years from Microsoft. The Apple environment is a little different, but we've really seen an improvement in their treatment of and their response to malware like that. So I'm not sure if virus scanning really is the kind of the panacea that we want it to be. So I would say that, you know, having good habits and taking responsibility as a user to update your operating system as well as your browser is a key step.
Thank you. This next one touches on the topic of MFA. And what are your thoughts on MFA? Should you be setting MFA for all of your accounts, such as online banking?
Well, as I said, when we come to work now, we have a range of cloud services that we access, and we may have logins for many of them. And so, you know, the short answer is yes. I have all of my accounts, no matter how simple they are, under multi-factor, because it gives me a certain peace of mind, and it also allows me to know if there's been any attempts on my account. If anybody has had multiple attempts on it, then that's something that I want to know about. And so it's something that maybe you'll develop the things that you like, the particular authentication app that you like, and a lot of them are you know, very comparable in quality, and so we can really start to rely on this hardware-based second factor authentication, particularly when it's linked to something like biometrics. And so fingerprint scanners or face scanning is really difficult to thwart. And so I think it's something that we can take comfort in using.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Are you more secure setting up your online account with a program such as LastPass that can generate and save long and more complex passwords?
Yeah, and this is the question around password managers. And so password managers are now being offered by a lot of browsers as well. So Firefox and Safari and Google will offer you a secure password that is very long, that is in that passphrase, but very complex and difficult to remember. But I think that it's definitely a good way to go. Put second factor authentication on your LastPass as well. But what you're doing with that is you are really starting to move away from the habit of updating your password every 6 months. Because what happens, and there's good research to support this, is that individuals who are asked to update their password every 6 months will tend to increment their passwords. And so they will have super secure password 1, super secure password 2. And that kind of incremental modification of your passwords is not doing anyone any good, that it's very easy to solve that. And so password managers allow you to get away from that kind of vulnerability when you're asked by your IT department to update your password. So that's a really key benefit of using a password manager.
Great. And the next one is related to password managers. And which is the best password manager and how secure are they?
I'm not going to. I've been doing a little bit of product placement unintentionally here. I'm not going to necessarily choose one for you, but a quick Google, read some reviews. Maybe better than that would be to contact your IT department, and those folks I think would have opinions on that, particularly relating to the kinds of infrastructure that you're running.
Great, thank you. Can you suggest options for assistance with employees whom Wi-Fi and multi-factor security service? And I think you touched on this a little bit in your presentation.
So the question is, how do we assist employees to deploy these things?
Can you suggest options for assistance with employees whom Wi-Fi and multi-factor security services?
Yeah, and so I think this is something that we want to normalize as well, is maybe annual trainings on some of these technologies that will all be at different levels of comfort with these kinds of technologies and the different kinds of trends that are happening, and that I think most institutions at a high level should be training their employees at least annually. If not having a newsletter associated with different security risks that are happening, because the area is so fast moving, that we saw when COVID-19 hit, that RDP really became a trend, and that some of these very targeted spear phishing attacks were measurable by platforms like Shodan. And so because they move so quickly within the frame of weeks and months, I think it's an important institutional organizational decision to really educate and inform on an ongoing basis.
Great, thank you. And I have one more question here for you, Aaron. What information do you think hackers are most interested in? And is there a way to prioritize and identify the most the type of data that is most at risk?
That's a great question. And I suppose that it really depends on the context. And so for an individual, like our example, involved in COVID-19 research or logistics, that their information, their access to maybe proprietary, might have national security level issues, might have intellectual property value issues. And so really the question then becomes, what kinds of risks do you as an individual pose, or what kind of opportunities to an attacker do you pose specifically? Who do you work for or with that might expose you as well to this kind of attention? And so it's very context specific, but I think it's important for us to do what we would call like a threat assessment, and the kinds of risks that we might be exposed to as individuals in the workplace. I think in the university context, it would be important to think of yourself, if you do move between an academic and a corporate context, or even a national governmental context, which many researchers do. Does that kind of position maybe expose you to certain risks that your work at your university or academic context might be less secure, or you might treat as more open because you're interacting with students on a daily basis? Then you go and work on your COVID-19 research. That might give an attacker a way of pivoting into valuable data and resources, which can be a risk. And so I would say that it's important for us to maybe have that conversation within our own institutions to understand how an individual might be a likely target, and the ways that they might be targeted for the kinds of access that they have.
I anticipate the topic of cybersecurity is going to be a hot one and relevance, perhaps the most relevant in the coming year. Thank you. Thank you, Aaron, for your thoughtful insights and taking for the time for being here and sharing your thoughts and words of wisdom with our participants and viewers here. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you, Abdul.
I also want to take a moment to bring to all of you who are watching today's session about a program that Goodman Group is will be bringing to your attention in the new year. So this is a recent partnership between the Goodman School and the Cybersecurity, and the Supply Chain Institute of Canada. And that partnership has yielded a cybersecurity seminar, which will be taking place on the 26th and the 27th of January. There is pricing for this available to you on your screen. But if you are a Brock staff, student, or faculty, please contact myself or a member of my team for discounts. And for those who are members of the supply chain already, there are additional discounts there as well. And for those who are not but are interested, there is the added bonus feature of a supply chain membership for a year, which is provided complimentary with enrollment in this program. So that is the 26th and the 27th of January on cybersecurity. So the registration is open. There are limited virtual seats. So I would encourage you to take up these seats at your earliest convenience. As we bring this session of Business Breeders to a close, I want to pause for a moment, if I might, and reflect on the activities of the past months. This webinar series came out of this pandemic, an opportunity for us to connect with our stakeholders, our community members. And this was, we had, when we started on this path, we were looking forward to being able to serve and connect and provide a service to our stakeholders. And we've been blown away by the extent of the response, the overwhelmingly positive response that we have received. I just want to throw 3 numbers or so in there. And, so we've been doing this for approximately 7 or so months. We've had folks from over 20 countries join and participate in these sessions, 24 webinars, and nearly 2,500 registrations for the sessions. These are quite astonishing numbers. And of course, this would not be possible at all without the dedicated faculty and industry leaders who have taken time out of their busy schedule, especially in this time and this environment, which is unlike any other, and have provided insight into the 24 different topic areas that we have touched on. And of course, I also want to thank the nearly 2,500 registrants for attending these sessions, for taking interest in these. And of course, all of these recordings are available on the website, and we're seeing significant interest there as well. So that this is part and parcel of the activities that we do here. So the next session, of course, for this series will be in the new year, 13th of January, same time. It'll be a Wednesday at 11, and it will be for 45 minutes, 11 to 11:45. But I do want to acknowledge that this year and this forthcoming holiday period is going to be unlike any other. We're going to be asked to do things much differently. We're hearing in other parts of this country and the world that folks are being asked to limit the number of individuals that they will have as part of the circle during the holiday season. And that's going to affect all of us in a different way. So I just want to make a note of that this is unlike any other. Yet, the new year with the vaccines coming out and the good news that we're hearing on that front and other advancements coming in looks quite bright at the same time as well. So we're looking forward to having a much brighter and more prosperous year but of course, a safe one for everyone, and a safe holiday period for all that will be for everyone here and around the world as well. Thank you all very much for being here, for participating, for taking the time, obviously, especially in this period. And stay safe until we see you guys in January.